Okay, camera, video. Oh, that's one of the reasons. See? It's a little too much light. That's look like a ghost. Good evening and welcome to everyone that's joined us this evening. This is a program on the Temple Talk series of programs. And the program tonight is in a series of programs about the environment and climate. And we're delighted to have Sandra Levine here from the Great Swamp Watershed Association. If you don't know what that is, you're going to learn all about it. Sandra is the Director of Water Quality Programming at the Great Swamp, and she's a professor at Drew University. She just came back from teaching, as a matter of fact, to join us, and we appreciate her time this evening. If you're joining us this evening, feel free to ask questions as we go or put them in chat. And if Sandra is speaking, then I will let her know what the chat question was if she doesn't pick it up. So we have about an hour to, or depending on the questions, we'll see how it goes for Sandra to share this information. And as I was made aware recently that the headwaters of the Patterson Falls is where the Great Swamp originates, and it makes its way to those falls if you've been to Patterson. So it's delightful. So without that, I want to stop my talking and introduce Sandra and say welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for reaching out to Great Swamp Watershed Association. We are always happy to talk more about the work that we do and to hopefully pick up some new volunteers to help us with all that we do, whether you help us directly through some of our programs or just by thinking about what you're doing on your own property or in your own backyard. So I do have a PowerPoint this evening, but as Bob said, I would much rather have this be a conversation than me giving another lecture, because I just came from that, and you know, my college students don't ever talk to me, so I'd be happy if you guys talk to me. But anyway, so feel free to, if you have a question, to unmute and pop in. Or if you don't want to do that, you can throw it in the chat, and Bob will call out your questions to me. Yes, Stacy.
Hi. Yeah, I was on the Hackensack River and talking to people about the great save that they did with the Hackensack River with the cleanup. And I heard someone on that tour on that day a couple of years ago say that the Passaic River is beyond saving.
This is totally not true. So I'll talk a little bit more about this in my talk, and we'll talk about some of the issues and some of the high points. I can tell you that the headwaters region of the Passaic River contains some of the cleanest and most pristine waters in New Jersey. The other end, we'll talk about that.
Okay, well, that's good news, because I could understand why. I live within 150 feet of the Passaic in Fair Lawn, and sometimes when I look at it or when I'm close to it, it seems like it is almost beyond repair. So I'm glad you say what you say.
Yep. All right, so I'm going to get started with the presentation, but again, please feel free to hop in. Once I share my screen, I won't be able to see all of your happy faces anymore. So just shout out your questions and feel free to interrupt. Again, I'd much rather have a conversation than just a talk. So, okay. All right, so. There we go. All right, so again, so we're Great Swamp Watershed Association, and I kind of titled this Water Quality and Community Connections, because one of the things that we do is we work within the communities, and we work with volunteers from the communities to be able to do all of the work we do. Yep.
Get it on your screen.
Does someone have a question? I can't quite hear. Or is it just someone unmuted? Okay. Again, if you have a
Synagogue.org.
Go to it, Sandra.
Okay. All right. So keeping our waters clean for everyone. The picture that you see is one of our trails that we have on our conservation property in Harding. So our mission really is one river, one community. And what we do is we work with communities on stream cleanups, to educate, to advocate, and we underpin all of the work we do with the water quality data that we collect. And our thought process is really that, you know, it is one river, and, you know, you're asking about, is it beyond saving? It certainly isn't, though there are parts of it that need help. We want this river to be there for generations to come, and we want them to be able to enjoy it as much as, if not more than, we can currently enjoy it now. So where we work, for those of you who don't know the Passaic River watershed, it's pretty large. And it actually, though the map doesn't show it, the full Passaic River watershed goes up into New York State, because it includes the Ramapo River, which has its beginnings just over the border in New York. It also includes the Rockaway, the Whippany rivers, the Third River. The highlighted area that you see, the entire highlighted area, is the current area within the watershed that we're sampling for water quality. The dark green area that you see down in the corner there, that is the Great Swamp Subwatershed. That's where our organization started. That area back in the 60s was slated to be turned into what is now essentially Newark Airport. And a grassroots group of people got together and fought that. And won, and turned it into, or turned a good portion of it into, the Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge, which is within that subwatershed. Just a quick, because I'm going to throw this term around there a lot, for anyone who doesn't know the definition of really what a watershed is. A watershed is a topographical area where all of the rain falling on that one area has one drain, one outlet, or one source. So when I'm teaching, you know, high school students, I talk about it in terms of a bathtub. You turn the shower on, all the water goes out one drain. Here, when the rain comes down, all of the water goes out one drain, and that drain is essentially Newark Bay. That's where the Passaic River output is. So that just gives you kind of an overview of the area where we're working. Up until 2016, we concentrated just on that Great Swamp Subwatershed in dark green. And then our board of directors decided that, you know, we care so much about the headwaters, we should see what's going on along the rest of the river. And so over the last 5 years, we've been slowly expanding our water quality sampling and our education efforts downstream. So what we have found is that there's pretty big differences between the upstream and the downstream areas. The upstream areas include the National Wildlife Refuge, which is that picturesque green picture over on the left on my screen. And the downstream areas have their own set of different issues, because there's a lot of development, a lot of urban areas downstream, and that has a big impact on what happens with the water quality. So we, as I said, all of our efforts are underpinned by our water quality monitoring program, and that's my department in particular. That's my daughter, who during the pandemic, when I was no longer allowed to work with volunteers in 2020, we didn't want to stop sampling. So I dragged her along, and she did all of my water quality sampling with me that year. But so we do chemical monitoring. We do this 4 times a year to catch the seasonal changes. In fact, my next sampling will be next week. Weather permitting is our first sampling for 2022. We sample 22 sites between the headwaters of the Passaic River in Mendham and our current furthest downstream site, which is at Little Falls. So along that stretch, we sample some of the tributaries within the Great Swamp Watershed, but most of our sampling sites are right on the main stem of the Passaic River. We have a great team of volunteers, and we're always looking for more. who perform visual assessments on the stream twice a year. Right now, we're covering 22 sites. Our furthest downstream visual assessment site is actually only in Wayne, so we're still looking for some people downstream to pick up those monitoring sites. It takes about an hour. You go out to the stream. We teach you how to read the stream using New Jersey DEP protocols. And you look at erosion, you look at the water quality, you take the temperature, you look at what's going around the stream stretch that you're monitoring to determine what's going on within the water itself. So that's a great program that our volunteers really monitor. And the other volunteer-based program that we run in the summer for 5 consecutive weeks is our bacteria monitoring program. Here we're looking at E. coli and total coliform bacteria within the water. This in the upstream areas is usually a big problem. It's driven by Canada geese, which are invasive. It's driven by people not picking up after their pets. And so the bacterial levels in the summer can get quite high if the water gets too warm. So we monitor that. We report those findings to DEP so that they can use that data as well. So if there are problem sites, we can look at things that we can do to improve the water quality there, as well as to reduce bacterial inputs. Our macroinvertebrate sampling. So macroinvertebrates are the insects, insect larvae, as well as things like worms, mussels, snails, crayfish in the water. We can use them to help determine what's going on in the water quality. There's a reference guide which rates them based on how much pollution they can tolerate. So depending on which species we find when we do our sampling in the spring, we can really start to pick apart what's going on in the water in that area. And then most recently, we added culvert sampling. Culverts are any of your stream crossings, your bridges, your driveways, anywhere where the stream is crossed by a man-made structure. And the point of this type of sampling, which we also use volunteers to accomplish, is to determine whether or not these bridges and structures are wide enough and well built enough to sustain what's happening with climate change and with ever increasing water amounts and flooding. So those are all of the different types of water quality data that we collect throughout the year. We're about to put out our 2021 report card. So we put all that data together in a report card and make it available to the public. And I'll give a talk on that. Usually in April is when that happens, right around Earth Day. And we review all those findings. All right, so one of the main things we do, as I said, is we advocate. And this goes back to is the river clean upable downstream? One of the big issues with the Passaic River, the lower 17 miles of the Passaic River make up the largest Superfund site in United States history. So Superfund sites are areas where heavy pollution has degraded an area to the point of it being impacted for the native wildlife in the area, for human habitation or use. In the lower Passaic River in the 60s and 70s, Diamond Alkali and other companies produced Agent Orange, which was a huge defoliant. However, the effluent that came from those factories, as well as the leftover product, was dumped into the Newark River, with the thought being that the flow of the river would carry it out into the ocean, and the ocean was too big for this small amount of pollution to be impacted by. We now know, 40, 50 years on, how many wrong things are in that statement. The first of which is obviously the ocean can be impacted, and pollution in the ocean is a big problem. The other problem is the lower portion of the Passaic River is tidal. So instead of all of the effluent being carried out into the ocean, with the tide, it was actually pushed back upstream to the first dam, which is Dundee Dam. And so everything below Dundee Dam, all the sediment within that is contaminated to varying degrees. Obviously, the closer you get to Newark Bay and the lower Newark area, which is where the plant was, the more heavily polluted the sediment is. Dioxins are the main concern. They're a carcinogen, and they're in the sediment. They're in with the bottom 3 feet of sediment. But this Superfund site, with the work of the Superfund CAGs, which are the community action groups, and Great Swamp Watershed is a part of that process as part of our advocacy. They're moving forward. They have done test sites. They have mapped all of the contamination, and the test sites, they're using a screening process to cordon off areas, and then they are removing the bottom 3 feet of sediment, and then they will cap that and replace the sediment with clean sediment, so that they're mimicking the natural environment of the bottom of the stream. In the areas where they've already done the cleanup, the recruitment of native animals and organisms that should live there, both aquatic plants as well as native crabs and mussels, has been amazing. So once it's cleaned up, the rebound process is happening fairly quickly and to a higher degree even than they expected. The potential finish date for that project, I believe right now, is set for 2035. So it's going to be a long process, but they are doing the cleanup, and it is showing really great signs of going to be a very successful project. So, all right. So some of the other things that Great Swamp Watershed Association does is river cleanups. So this is an area actually in Fairlawn. This is at the end of Camp Lane, right at there's a boat launch there. And after Hurricane Ida, I was there. This is one of our sampling sites, and the floodplain area was just full of debris that had been carried downstream by that flooding. And so we organized a cleanup with both township partners as well as the AmeriCorps Watershed Ambassador Program. We had about 18 people come out to help us clean up. We pulled, I think, 22 tires, more lumber than, with the price of lumber, I was like, somebody should just come and take it and use it, but so much lumber that had floated downstream. The majority of what we found were plastics. There were coolers, there was styrofoam, but the DPW brought a pickup truck because they thought that would be enough for our cleanup, and they left and come back with a full-sized garbage truck to be able to collect all of the garbage that we cleaned up. So we look for areas along the entire length of the stream where we see we could make an impact by doing these types of cleanups. And then we reach out to the local community and the environmental groups. And, you know, we do what we can to really get these areas cleaned up. So the other part of stewardship is restoration. As we move forward, we're going to talk a little bit more about climate change and flood impacts. But we have just completed a $60,000 forest floodplain restoration project in Harding. And the more impactful weather events that we've been having are causing such downstream flooding issues. We look at areas like Wayne and Patterson and even Newark, and the amount of flooding that they're having. And one way that environmentally we need to work to fix that is to restore upstream areas that were historically marshes and floodplain forests, because these areas will then hold and store that rainwater for a much longer period of time and release it slowly so that the downstream flooding is not so bad, because we're holding the water in the upstream areas as it traditionally would be and historically should be. So what we did was we took this section of floodplain forest that had back in the 1920s to early 30s been drained for farming. That was used for forage for sheep and for cattle. And then even though they haven't farmed there in probably 50 years, they did not restore the floodplain. So all of the rivers and the banks that they had put in to get the water out of the floodplain forest quickly were still in place. So we went back in with a grant from a 319 grant from the DEP, and we recreated the curves within the stream, and then we filled in areas that were drainage dishes, and then we raised the water table so that the water is now held in that floodplain forest. I don't have any good before pictures kind of in this montage, but you can see that one picture on my screen, it's on the left, is now a big floodplain marsh. And that's holding water all year long, when 2 years ago, it would get a little wet during the spring rains and then it would be dry for the rest of the year. So that is thousands of gallons of water that we're now holding in this area that's not progressing downstream for flooding. The two pictures in the center are a smaller type of restoration project that we did with a local community. Again, we had areas where the surrounding area had been pretty much cleared. And so the rainwater is coming across and coming through that particular stream stretch very quickly and eroding out the banks. And so we went in, and the second picture there, the lower picture in the middle, is the restoration. We restored that stream bank. We planted native plants in there. We installed steps so that they could do educational programming there. And this was about 2 years ago. I guess this was early 2020. And then I can tell you that now that whole stream bank has really filled in. It's full of shrubs and native plants. There's irises in there. And so it's really been stabilized so that even when the floodwaters come through or the rainwaters wash through, the dirt within that bank is no longer being washed away. So one of the ways that we do that work is we have work days. We have community groups, we have company groups, we have church groups, all of which come out and will work with us for a day on our property in Harding. Again, this is the 70-acre forest floodplain where we just did the restoration. There's still lots of work to be done because we took our property and turned it back into a floodplain forest. We had to build over 1,500 feet of boardwalk so that people could still walk through the area recreationally and we could still use it for education purposes. We have removed lots of invasive plant species that don't belong in this forest area. And then we have days where we spend replanting with all of the native plants that should be there to support the wildlife and diversity of that floodplain forest. And all of this, like I said, is done with volunteers. We usually have weekly work days through the spring and summer and early fall on Fridays. And then, like I said, we have groups that come out, whether it's for team building exercises or just for volunteer work days because they want to give back to the community, and they help us to really do this work and restore and maintain this forested floodplain. We do lots of education, not just adult education like programs like tonight, but we work with schools throughout the entire region. It's our belief that using the water quality data that we have and showing students, usually high school, middle school to high school level students, how to collect data in their local streams and how to look at it scientifically so that they understand what it's telling them, and then giving them the tools to be able to make changes for the better in their own communities, really engaging these students. And it's the, our belief, my belief certainly, that by engaging the next generation, that's how we're going to move forward. That's how we're going to preserve these areas and continue to have community buy-in and engagement where they really care about what's happening within the waters of the region. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some climate change issues. These are all pictures of downstream flooding in Wayne, as I was talking about. The impacts of climate change on our waters are huge. We're finding that extended periods of drought followed by more intense rain events cause much more flooding and much more erosion. So what's happening is the ground dries out during those long dry spells. And then instead of getting rain events like historically we would have, where you have over the course of 3 or 4 days, you get maybe 1 inch to 1.5 inches of rain. It's kind of that steady rainfall that just keeps everything wet, makes it so your garden grows. And instead of getting those rainfalls, we're getting these more intense storms that are dropping 4 to 6 to 9 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. When the ground is really dry, there's no absorption, right? So think about if you have a super dry sponge in your sink or that you're using to clean and it's gotten completely dried out, the first few minutes of you running water over that sponge, it just runs off. It doesn't soak into the sponge. And that's exactly what's happening with our soils in the area. And so we're seeing these more impactful floods. And so that's one of the issues with climate change. So this is the Rutgers State Climatology Office. This is the previous 12 months temperature and precipitation departures. And if you look, we're having much warmer weather. We had the 6th warmest summer, the 2nd warmest October. You know, overall, we're seeing consecutively warm weather, and those temperatures are drying that soil out even faster. And you combined that with the wettest July and August and September and October all being well above the rain average for the amount of waterfall that we're getting. And that's what's causing these flooding issues. So, you know, why is that, you know, what is the issue that's causing it? So we call it's runoff. We call it runoff from rainstorms. And all of it is going to end up in our rivers one way or another. It becomes stormwater. It causes the flooding. We have huge erosion on our stream banks just being eaten away, and it carries pollution. So as the water hits the surface, it's picking up everything that's there. It's picking up oil from people's cars. It's picking up plastic and litter that has gotten on the ground, whether because people just littered or, you know, in heavy storms, you know, garbage cans will get knocked over, they'll spill. All of that gets picked up and carried and ends up in our streams. When you think that the Passaic River provides drinking water for over 2 million people, that's a big problem. And so we are working to help offset those issues. So again, this is just some more, what is stormwater? So water following a rain event or a snow event that does not infiltrate the surface. It means it's not percolating down through the soil to the root systems, which work as natural cleansers for our waters. And so it has that potential. It's going to introduce new pollutants, like I said, pet waste, motor oil, plastics, trash. When I do my sampling and we're doing our visual assessment and we're looking at what trash is in the area, the most common thing we see is single-use plastics, plastic bags, plastic bottles, you know, any of those single wrappers, all of those single-use plastics that are so light, easily transportable, they end up in our waterways. So this is how it works. In a forested area, where there is not impervious cover being houses, rooftops, parking lots, roads, anywhere where We've covered the surface of the soil. We get about 50% of the rainwater infiltrates into the soil, is absorbed, is cleaned and filtered by the root systems of the native plants and trees before it slowly makes its way into the streams. When you have an urban area, we get 55% of that is runoff directly into the streams across the surface. So it's a huge impact the more we cover things up. So to have healthy streams and drinking water, you really need to look at the land around your streams, not just the stream itself. Again, where is the water coming from? What is it coming over before it gets to the streams? That's what's going to have the biggest impact on the water quality. So we look at impervious and pervious cover and what we can do about it. Pervious cover, again, those driveways, sidewalks, roofs, buildings, parking lots, all of that. Pervious cover is everything else. It's our gardens, it's our forests, it's our parks. There's a little bit of a gray area here. A mown, manicured lawn almost works as impervious cover. The way our lawn grasses work, they're not native, and the root system is a depth about equal to the height of your grass above it. So if you keep your grass mowed to about 2 inches, the roots only go down about 2 inches, and then they really intertwine, forming such a tight mat that the rain can't percolate through it. So it becomes almost like an impervious surface when you have that constant mowed lawn. So we always advocate to break up your lawn with gardens and natural areas, and that really can make a difference. So what kind of impact do those impervious surfaces have on not just the river, but the things that live and depend on the river? They have a really big impact. So the more impervious cover, so, you know, greater than 20%, which doesn't seem like a lot, we start to have warmer water because all of those hot surfaces, the roads, the parking lots, when the rainwater hits it, it's going to heat up, especially in the warmer months. You know, all of those surfaces absorb the heat, and that increases the water temperature. But organisms that live in our streams, they need that stream water to stay below a certain temperature, or they're going to be stressed. They're not going to breed as well. They're not going to survive as well. Ideally, we look at less than 5%, right? That's when we can have brook trout, which we look at as an indicator species. If we see brook trout breeding in a stream, we know that it's healthy. Brook trout breed in the headwaters region of the Passaic River. And so we know that those waters are really clean. They're cool temperatures and staying clean. So you can see this kind of sliding scale. But the long and short of it is, we need houses, we need stores to a certain extent, you know, we need those places where we can buy food and buy necessities. So how do we balance that? Again, more impervious surface is more water entering the stream at a faster rate. So when we have areas where the water can percolate down, it's coming into the stream at a slower rate, we have less flooding. When it's coming across those hard surfaces, it's coming at a much higher velocity. We're going to have more erosion. More erosion means more dirt particles in the stream, which is, again, makes it harder for things like fish to breathe because they're pushing water through the gills. If the water is full of dirt particles, much harder for them to do that. So we want to understand what's going on, what impact we're having on the water quality. So how do we fix it? How do we as a community look to solutions for these types of problems? Traditionally, historically, we looked at gray infrastructure. This is stormwater basins that are cement lined. This is culvert pipes that are directing the water away from areas where people are living or having their shopping to try and move the water away as fast as possible. what we realize now is that we're just pushing our problem further downstream. So that's not the best solution, right? That increases downstream flooding. So instead, now we look to green, or now they're starting to divide between blue and green infrastructure solutions. And this is what we work with communities to help gain a better understanding, as well as we look at ways to help communities install these particular infrastructure amendments. So green solutions can include green streets, where we break up the sidewalk with areas of gardens or grass or trees, so that there are areas where the water can begin to infiltrate. It can include things like permeable pavement in playgrounds. So there are types of pavement now that are designed so that the rainwater can still filter through it instead of just running off. It can include things like green roofs in urban areas. This is a more new solution, green buildings, green roofs, where they're actually incorporating vegetation into the structure of the building to help absorb. It also helps to keep things cooler, because you have that transpiration where the water is evaporating and cooling the buildings themselves. So, too many. So we want to, again, slow that stormwater. The way we do that, we break up lawns, we install rain gardens, we install different garden structures, maybe rain barrels to use to water our gardens. All of these things begin to offset that stormwater runoff so that it is not all hitting the streams at the same time. We want to try and, by doing that, we want to try and mimic natural systems. Again, rain gardens are areas like little miniature floodplains where the water is held and it waters native plants that like to have wet roots. They bring in native pollinators, native organisms that will pollinate and enhance the diversity of the ecosystem in that local area. So how does a rain garden work? It can be as big or as small as you have room for. Ideally, it'll break up a green lawn area, or potentially when we install them with schools that we're working with in Patterson, we're actually breaking up their blacktop playgrounds and installing these rain gardens. You have a depression area, and the plants at the lowest portion of the depression are areas that like to be wet year round. As you move up the sides of your rain garden, you plant plants that are tolerate different ranges of moisture in the soil. And those root systems help to absorb the water, slow the flow, and filter the water as it passes out through the bottom of the rain garden and into the groundwater system. So this is one of the productions we did. This was done with volunteers from William Patterson University, as well as Rutgers, and some of our local volunteers. We broke up an area of playground at one of the schools in Patterson. The students helped design the rain garden. They chose which plants they wanted to put in there and how they would work. And then they planted them. This was a 4th grade project. And each year at the beginning of the year, the 5th graders who have just moved up teach the next class of 4th graders how to maintain and care for the garden. And they teach them about the benefits, about the pollinators it brings in. And it's been this living program that we go in and work with them every year. So it's been really amazing to see this grow. So I keep skipping to, what other things do we want to do when we think about living in a kind of watershed friendly way? Winter is a big time to think about living watershed friendly, right? We're having a storm tomorrow. All over the roads, you're already seeing towns lay down salt brine as well as rock salt to keep those roads from icing. Salt is a big issue. The stormwater brings the salt into the Passaic River. Passaic River is a freshwater system. The salt is beginning to have a continuous impact on the organisms that live there. Things like crayfish, mussels, snails, all of those that have hard shells, the salt begins to dissolve those and soften them, and it weakens them. So we're seeing those populations starting to be impacted. You can help in a small way by choosing environmentally friendly de-icing products. We try and work with communities. If you know what brining is, it's when they go out before a storm and lay down salt water. The amount of salt in the salt water is much lower than just putting rock salt on the roads, but they can only do that before a storm. Once the storm starts, they need to use a combination of plowing and rock salt to keep the roads clean. There are environmentally friendly alternatives on a small scale for your own house, your own driveway. That's feasible. Right now, on a large scale, rock salt costs about 50 cents a cubic ton. The next nearest alternative still costs about $750 a cubic ton. So if you're deciding on how much money the taxpayers are going to put towards keeping the roads clean, unfortunately, at this point, it still tends to be rock salt. But the more people who buy these alternatives on a local level, the higher the production will get, the lower the cost will come. So that's how we're looking to deal with that. As far as fertilizers, it is really important. We all want to have healthy lawns and healthy gardens. It is really important not to fertilize your lawns just before a storm, because then pretty much most of your fertilizer is running off right into the streams. But it's also important, you know, you can go to your local hardware or garden center and get a pH soil test. See what your soil really needs. Does it really need any fertilizer? And then look to things that are more natural fertilizers than some of the more chemical, easily obtainable options. So all of those things are really good ways to keep those extra nutrients, which are harmful to the streams, out of the streams. And again, you know, the best solution, and, you know, I have teen children who I enslave in the winter, but the best solution is to shovel, because then you're not putting anything down, which is unnatural. But there are alternatives. Natural kitty litters, not the clumping kitty litters, but natural clay, natural corn-based or cob-based kitty litters, all of those will give you traction. Ash, if you have a fireplace or a wood-burning stove, you can use ash, which will give you traction, and it will help to melt that snow. Sand is good for traction, of course. Sugar beet and beet byproducts are good. You can get them locally at usually your local hardware store. Coffee grounds are good, and because they're dark in color and acidic, not only will they melt, not only will they melt the snow and the ice and give you traction, but the acidity will help the ice to stop from reforming. So that's really good as well. Again, watershed friendly, keep that pet waste from getting into our streams. Pick up after your pets. And I will say, one of the worst things I see is people who pick up after their pet using the little pet waste baggies and then leave the pet waste baggie on the side of the road or the sidewalk. Just take them home, throw them out. That's the best thing to do. They now have many of the pet waste bags come in biodegradable plastics, which break down. They're usually cornstarch based, and so they'll break down, so you're not even adding plastics to our waste stream. And then you can reduce erosion and sediment from entering our streams. If you live close to a stream, or even if your property is on a slope, by breaking up the downslope areas of your lawns, it helps to slow the water flow, it reduces erosion, and it captures a lot of those pollutants that might come off your lawn before they can get to the storm drain. all of the storm drains in New Jersey connect directly to our streams. So we want to try and keep everything out of those storm drains. And finally, again, for erosion, if you're doing work or you have an area of your lawn that is bare or being disrupted, lay down some hay, something to catch that soil. So again, it doesn't just end up in the storm drains. And then on those downstream areas, plant a vegetative buffer. Shrubs, multi-stemmed plants throw down great root systems, especially when they're native plants. It breaks up the soil, allows more water to percolate in, and really works as a beneficial filter, as well as wildlife corridors, and bringing in those native pollinators, which we really want to support. So again, I always advocate to break up those lawns. Not only does it help environmentally, it reduces your work at your end, right? So less mowing you have to do. And if you're using native plants, once they're established, you pretty much don't have to water them. You want to go in, make sure no invasives are getting in there, but it can really just be a beautiful addition to your lawn. You know, it can add color all year long to your landscape, and it really, really helps to filter the water and to capture the water and reduce flooding.
Hi,
So
can I ask a question?
Sure.
How about using artificial lawns?
So like artificial turf on like playing fields and stuff?
Or the front lawn?
So artificial turf is, it's really more of a impervious surface. It can be permeable. It often introduces chemicals and plastics into the system as it breaks down, because they will break down. We will always advocate natural native habitats over anything artificial. There are times and reasons where that's a necessary step. And so often for playing fields, for safety reasons, they find them more beneficial. But there are environmentally friendly ways to do that. That's not one of my areas of expertise, but again, generally speaking, we want to see native plants, live plants, taking up that space because they're much more beneficial, both to the environment as a whole, to our native pollinators, as well as to processing and filtering the rainwater that's coming down.
Oh, okay. Because we live right by a very, very busy road that they put tons of salt to the point where we usually have a mountain at the end of the winter. And it was suggested to us to use, you can actually vacuum it and then you can get rid of all that salt without it going down into the water, because our well's also in the front yard.
Yeah, so I live on a well also, and our well is close to the road, much closer than I'd like it. But so one of the things that you can do is to put in kind of a natural rocky area, and then as native, what some might consider weeds, begin to grow within that rocky area, let them grow. So things that are hardy, really things like goldenrods and dandelions, even though they're not native, those sorts of things can tolerate a higher salt level. And by putting in kind of a rocky buffer, like the river rock type rocks, you're going to start to filter the salt away from your yard faster, and letting those kind of weedy plants that they'll grow in on their own take up, they will also begin to filter that salt out. You're much better doing that than putting in kind of an artificial surface, I would think.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. So again, change your mowing and watering regimes. The longer your lawn is, the more water it will absorb, the less you have to mow, and also the less you need to water it. So wait until your lawn is at least 4 inches high, and then only mow it down to 3 inches. So this will really help to encourage the root systems of the grass to grow down further, opening up the soil for the water to infiltrate better. Also leave your grass clippings there. They will naturally fertilize your soil and reintroduce nitrogen into your soil, making it so that you don't need as much fertilizer. So all of those things are beneficial. There's also been a lot of studies recently. A lot of people get nervous about ticks in their lawn. There's been a number of studies that have come out recently that say lawn height under 6 inches doesn't really make a big difference as far as the ticks are concerned. So anything between 3 and 6 inches is not going to make a big increase in ticks visiting your lawn. All right, and then again, conserve water. So in your gardens, use your mulch. It'll help keep down the weeds. It will help keep in the moisture. Use soaker hoses, so hoses that drip water out rather than using sprinklers, which waste a lot of water. And often water leaves, and a lot of your plants don't like their leaves to be wet. It'll burn the leaves. So you're much better off watering with these soaker type hoses near the base of your plants. And then again, use a rain barrel. If you have, you know, your water gutters off your house connected to a rain barrel, then you're holding on to that rainwater, and during those dry spells you can use that rainwater to water your gardens and conserve water rather than using water directly from your taps. So again, just if everyone does just a little bit, we begin to have a really big impact. In the summer, the amount of water usage from people watering gardens and lawns increases public water supplies by almost 50%. And then again, and this is really important, plant natives. So natives are much more beneficial to your wildlife that is native in the area. They require much less watering and maintenance. They're going to grow because they're used to growing here. We always encourage you to plant for pollinators. Our native bees, not only are they not colonial like honeybees are, you know, they work by themselves, but they use the stems of your plants, of the native plants, to overwinter. And so by planting with natives, for natives, we're really increasing our native pollinator population, which is beneficial to everyone. So again, biodiversity, we want to reduce pesticide use. By increasing the amount of diversity in your yard, you're much less likely to have pests in your yard, because you're going to bring in those insects that are going to take care of the pests for you. Farmers call it integrated pest management, but really what it is, if you plant for your native insects, then they're going to eat those problematic aphids that are going to attack your other plants. And so that's really the way to a more water friendly and environmentally friendly yard. Again, so this is the rain garden we did in Patterson. This is the one that you saw those students planting. This is 2 years later. This is all native plants. Within 2 years, they went from having just blacktop to having over 10 monarch butterflies on their plants, and making chrysalises on the milkweed that they had planted and then coming out as monarchs. So that was really amazing for those students to see. They get lots of native wildlife now. They watch birds. A variety of different birds come into their schoolyard every day. They eat the seeds. They use the habitat. They nest there. So it's really been an amazing project. And this can happen in anyone's yard. If you take a section of your yard and dedicate it to those native plants, they filter the water. They're much more beneficial because you don't need to use the pesticides. You don't need to use the fertilizers. That keeps our water much cleaner. And if you do it in the style of a rain garden, it really helps to offset downstream flooding as well. So our goal is to have every yard provide shelter, food, and water for our native wildlife, and to work as a filter for the stormwater as it comes down. To that end, Great Swamp Watershed Association, we gave these talks. We have given this type of talk for many years, and a lot of our feedback was, okay, but where do I get native plants? I go to my local garden store, I go to my local box, hardware store, and they don't have these native plants. They're not selling milkweed. They're not selling, red osier dogwood. They're not selling buttonbush, none of these native plants. And so we got together with a number of garden clubs to put on a native plant sale. This is our second year. We always need volunteers for this project. It is huge. I think this year I am only peripherally involved in the native plant sale. My coworker Hazel England organizes it and runs it. But I believe this year we are working with 15 towns to distribute plants. If you go to the website, it's greatswamp.org/native plant sale. I put the website up there for you guys. If you sign up with your email, you'll get notifications on when we need volunteers, as well as when the plant sale goes live, which is in just a couple of weeks. We expect that it will once again sell out fairly quickly. I believe last year we sold over 50,000 native plant plugs, and it sold out in 2 weeks. So just to give you a heads up, we sell kits in a variety of kind of sunlight and landscaping options. So we sell kits that are a group of plants that are good for being in the shade, being in wet areas, being in full sun, being in part sun. And there is a catalog and guide to help you decide what's best for your area. And we sell them at fairly low cost. So you're getting high quality native plant plugs at a fairly low price. And you're able to pick out what's suited for your location. So it's really a great opportunity. And again, if you're looking to have a fun way to volunteer and get involved with what we do, we spend about 2 weeks organizing, making everyone's package, getting the orders together, watering the plants, and doing all of that. So we can always use an extra hand there as well. So that is everything that I have to share with you this evening. I have my email address. Okay, yeah, that is my correct email address. It was recently changed, but that's my email address there on the screen. If you're interested in volunteering, whether with water quality sampling or monitoring or the plant sale, or you have any questions at all that you don't think of to ask now, please feel free to reach out to me. We would love to work with you folks. And it's been a pleasure, presenting what we do. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question for you.
Okay.
In your
First,
water
Okay.
testing, oh, go ahead, Bob, you go first.
No, it's you first. You're younger than me.
I see. Thanks. That's true, but sad to say. I guess the question is, in your water quality testing, what are you finding? Acid rain, or are you finding chemical runoff, or what? And has it increased or decreased? What are you finding?
So interestingly, over the course of the shutdown, we expected our water quality to improve in general, and it didn't. Primarily, our biggest upstream issue is road salt. our biggest downstream issue, and that would be downstream of the Great Swamp Watershed. So we're looking anything kind of summit and further downstream than that, tends to be nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen. A lot of that comes from our wastewater treatment plants and the effluent that they are legally allowed to put into the streams. Not one plant is exceeding its limits, but as they are all combined, the nutrient levels are beginning to be too high. And interestingly, because everyone was on lockdown, people who would normally be commuting into New York City or spending their day at work were all spending their day at home. And so the amount of wastewater effluent went up from our local wastewater treatment plants. And we're suspecting, we're not quite there yet on the research, but we're suspecting that this is what caused the kind of spike in phosphorus and nitrogen, which are our highest issues downstream. Road salt is a close second though. Road salt is persistent. And so it's a big issue because though salt dissolves in water, it doesn't go away and it'll settle into the sediment. And then when you have a rainstorm in the summer that churns up the bottom of the stream bed, that road salt is re-released into the system. And that can cause problems, especially during our breeding seasons, both with any of our crustacean type organisms, as well as with the fish. So those are the biggest issues. Water temperature is also a problem because so many of our stream areas have been cleared. And so we don't have that canopy cover, the trees overhanging our streams, keeping the water temperature down. So that can also be an impact.
Your turn, Bob.
Okay, I guess as we get older, we get more patience, and that's why I said you go first.
Okay.
Sandra, thank you so much for this very interesting, powerful discussion tonight. It blew my mind as to how much content there was in there, probably 10 times as much as I expected, but I do thank you for that. I wanted to make just a couple of quick comments and two very short questions. First,
Sure.
we talked about dioxin in the soil. As a chemist, I know that when Agent Orange was produced as a defoliant during, what is it, the Korean War, the biggest problem was the byproduct that gets manufactured when Agent Orange is produced, and that's dioxin, which is, as you mentioned, a very powerful human carcinogen. A lot of people came back from Agent Orange syndrome, which is attributable to the dioxin itself.
Yeah.
Dioxin is very, very persistent in the environment and very difficult to get rid of. So when you say that they're going to dig up some of the soils that have this high dioxin content, you're going to have a very high incineration heat in order to get rid of it. That was just that one comment. The second was, every time I've ever, throughout my life, thought of the word swamp, aside from watching movies like Swamp Monster, it had a pretty negative connotation. Give us, please, the real definition of what a swamp is, and then I'll ask one more question.
Sure. So I'm gonna actually address your comment first about the Agent Orange. So they are not incinerating. The plan is to dry out the sediment in a specific facility that they're building, and then the sediment will go to a waste management facility that is designed to take radioactive and toxic materials for storage. The offset was that what would be released if they burned it off would be
Hydrochloric acid.
Right. And so that's the plan for what they're doing with that sediment once it's removed. A swamp is an amazing area where the soil is covered or inundated by water for more than 6 months of the year. These areas offer the highest range of biodiversity within our region. They offer habitat for a wide range of animals and aquatic organisms. They are carbon sinks, so they absorb a lot of the carbon from our atmosphere through the high plant density within the swamps, as well as through the algae that grows in the water in a swampy area. And those are, again, beneficial as far as climate change goes. And they work as, like I said earlier, a flood deterrent. So they're absorbing and holding water, as well as filtering it and cleaning it before it's released downstream. So it increases water quality and clarity, as well as providing flood mitigation for downstream areas.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I guess when you talked about impervious surfaces, it brought to mind Joni Mitchell's song, The Big Yellow Taxi, where they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. That's ruined a lot of our environment. Last question is, when you do testing of these areas as watersheds, do you look for sodium ion and calcium ion from the kinds of typical ice melts?
So we do. We in situ, we sample for conductivity, which we can convert into a number that represents the amount of salt in the water. And then we also send samples out to a lab and do what's called a salt profile. So yeah, we're doing, sodium and calcium ions.
Okay, thank you so much again. It was wonderful.
You're welcome. If you want to know, if you guys want to hear more about kind of the water quality results for the year, like I said, the report card should go up by mid-March, and then I'll be giving a talk like this. It'll be virtual as well as in person. I think we're going to do a hybrid for that one, and that will be in early April. And if you watch our website, you'll be able to sign up for that. Do we have any other questions?
Sure, Rosalind, go.
Oh, I just want to know about New Jersey government. Do they get informed of your testing and your evaluations, and how do they react? Are they, on your side? How is Governor Murphy concerned about the environment? I'm not sure how he stands. So let me know about that.
We don't deal a lot with the governor directly. We certainly have state representatives who locally get involved with protecting the water. We do work closely with DEP and report our findings to DEP. DEP collects findings through their own work, as well as through all of the other nonprofit organizations who do this type of work. And they compile that into a report, which they use to grade all of the streams in the state and put them on the national list, rated based on how impaired the waters are. And then that list is what feeds their priorities for dealing with issues.
Thank you very much for your speech. It was really very educational and informative. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions?
Sandra, that was an amazing amount of information. I think I'd make this mandatory for all the adults in our communities to know more about their water and how they're impacting it, and really about the ecology and the way it works. I'm sure we are not as informed as we could be, and you did a tremendous amount here, and I'm looking forward to saving this recording and encourage others to view it, because it certainly was worthwhile.
Well, thank you so much.
More information than I ever thought I was going to hear, and I was
well, hopefully I didn't overwhelm you all.
I was happy to hear it. I wasn't overwhelmed by it. It just was important information from the immediacy of our own personal residences or constructions, or how we could really impact this even on an individual scale. So it's very powerful, and I'm looking forward to the plant sale. I hope to take part in that.
Yeah.
I know my friend.
And again, if you're interested in coming out and helping with stewardship or water quality sampling, we always need more volunteers, and I'd be happy to hear from you.
That's terrific. So I'm going to thank you for this evening's program. I think it was really well done. I think you fit right at the top of our high quality talks. which I have a great deal of pride in the quality of our programming, and you fit right there at the top. So I'm really delighted. So let me say thank you for that.